Imagine a city so rich in history that it once stood as the capital of the Roman Empire, a city whose walls had never fallen to an enemy. For over 1,000 years, Constantinople stood as a beacon of Christian power in the East, a bridge between Europe and Asia. But in 1453, all of that would change. Today, we're talking about one of the most significant events in world history, the fall of Constantinople. Let's set the stage. Constantinople was no ordinary city. Founded by Emperor Constantine the Great in 330 AD, it was more than just the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was the center of Christian civilization in the East. Situated strategically between Europe and Asia, controlling the Bosporus Strait, the city became a thriving hub of trade, culture, and religion. Its most famous building, the Hagia Sophia, was an architectural marvel, a symbol of the Christian world, and for centuries, it was the largest cathedral in the world. But by the 15th century, Constantinople's glory was fading. The once mighty Byzantine Empire had been reduced to a small, fragile state. The city's population had dwindled to just about 50,000, a far cry from the 500,000 it once held. Its territories were reduced to a few scattered islands and pockets of land. Constantinople, though still an imposing fortress, was surrounded, encircled by a new power rising from the east, the Ottoman Empire. Now, let's talk about the man who would change the fate of Constantinople forever, Sultan Mehmed II. When he came to the throne in 1451, Mehmed was only 19 years old. But don't let his youth fool you. He was ambitious, intelligent, and determined to expand his empire. For Mehmed, the conquest of Constantinople was more than just strategic, it was symbolic. Taking the city would mark the triumph of Islam over Christianity in the region and fulfill his dream of uniting the Ottoman Empire under one glorious capital. Over the years, the Ottomans had gradually encircled Constantinople, capturing key Byzantine territories and isolating the city. Mehmed knew that this was the final step to complete his empire. To prepare for the siege, he commissioned a massive fortress, the Rumeli Hisara, on the European side of the Bosporus Strait, effectively cutting off any aid to Constantinople by sea. This was the death knell for Byzantine hopes of receiving reinforcements. But Mehmed wasn't done. To ensure the city would fall, he turned to technology, more specifically, cannons. Massive cannons. Mehmed recruited a Hungarian engineer named Urban, who designed the largest cannon the world had ever seen. This cannon, known as Basilica, could hurl a 1,200-pound stone over a mile, capable of smashing through even the mightiest of walls. April 6, 1453. The siege begins. Inside the city, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI knew he was hopelessly outnumbered. His army consisted of just 7,000 soldiers, including a few hundred foreign mercenaries from Genoa and Venice. Facing him was Mehmed's army of anywhere between 80,000 to 100,000 men. But the Byzantine defenders had something the Ottomans didn't: Constantinople's legendary walls. The Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century, had withstood numerous sieges over the centuries. They were a marvel of ancient engineering, 3 layers thick, with deep moats and towering battlements. No army had ever successfully breached them. But this was the 15th century, and warfare was changing. Mehmed's artillery barraged the walls day and night. Stone after stone crashed into the ancient defenses, shaking them to their core. Inside the city, the people lived in constant fear. But the Byzantines didn't give up. Each night, the defenders would repair the damage done by the cannons, desperately trying to hold back the Ottoman tide. Meanwhile, Constantine XI sent out desperate pleas for help to the Christian powers of Europe. He appealed to the Pope, to the kings and princes of Italy, to anyone who would listen. But Europe, embroiled in its own political struggles, was slow to act. A few ships from Venice and Genoa arrived, but they were too few to turn the tide of the siege. As the siege dragged on, it became clear that the walls could not hold much longer. Mehmed knew it too. He sent several envoys to Constantine XI, offering terms of surrender. If the city was handed over, Mehmed promised safety for its inhabitants and its emperor. But Constantine refused. According to legend, he responded with these famous words: "The city is not mine to give. I would rather die than live as a slave." Mehmed knew then that the only way to take Constantinople was through sheer force, and so he prepared for a final, all-out assault. On the night of May 28, 1453, Mehmed rallied his troops for the decisive attack. He offered them promises of wealth, power, and the spoils of war. The soldiers were eager, knowing that Constantinople, the richest city in the known world, would soon be theirs. Before the attack, the people of Constantinople gathered in the Hagia Sophia for what would be their last Christian service in the great cathedral. The mood was somber. They knew what was coming. In the early hours of May 29th, the final assault began. Waves of Ottoman soldiers stormed the walls. The defenders fought with everything they had, but they were exhausted and outnumbered. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander who had been leading the defense, was gravely wounded. His retreat demoralized the defenders. At last, the Ottomans breached the walls. Chaos erupted in the city. Mehmed's forces poured in, looting, burning, and pillaging. The streets ran with blood as the last defenders made their final desperate stand. Emperor Constantine XI, realizing that all was lost, cast off his imperial robes and charged into battle, fighting to the death. His body was never found. By the morning of May 29, 1453, Constantinople had fallen. The once mighty Byzantine Empire was no more. Sultan Mehmed II entered the city in triumph. His first stop was the Hagia Sophia, where he prayed, marking the conversion of the great church into a mosque. The Christian cross that had stood over the city for 1,000 years was replaced with the crescent moon of Islam. The fall of Constantinople marked a turning point in history. For the Ottomans, it was the beginning of a golden age. The city became Istanbul, the heart of a vast empire that would rule for centuries. Mehmed II was hailed as the conqueror, his legacy forever tied to the city he had claimed. But for the Christian world, the fall was a catastrophe. It was the end of an era. The Byzantine Empire, once the greatest Christian power in the East, was gone. The fall sent shockwaves through Europe, and many feared that the Ottomans would continue their conquest westward. So, what was the legacy of the fall of Constantinople? For Europe, it marked the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of a new era. Greek scholars fleeing the city brought with them ancient texts that would help spark the Renaissance. The loss of Constantinople also forced Europeans to seek new trade routes, leading to the Age of Exploration, which would change the world forever. For the Ottomans, the fall established Istanbul as the capital of a vast and powerful empire. The city would thrive under Ottoman rule, becoming one of the most important cities in the world, a crossroads of cultures, religions, and trade. The fall of Constantinople remains one of the most significant events in world history, a moment that marked the end of one era and the dawn of another. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of the fall of Constantinople. If you enjoyed this video and want more historical deep dives, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll be covering more fascinating stories from history, so stay tuned.